Director at Special Olympics Ontario. And it's with a deep sense of privilege, honor, and sadness that we come together today to remember the life of George Ricardo. I started with Special Olympics as part of Special Olympics Toronto 14 years ago. And I remember vividly my introduction to George. He was one of the first athletes I met, and he was a character. I remember him encouraging me to restart the Etobicoke track program, which became the Etobicoke Energy. I remember him sharing his talent for art and encouraging other athletes to do better and be better. George challenged me to do the same. George has been a defining part of Special Olympics for myself and for so many people, and I'm honored to count myself among them. He will be dearly missed. So today we come together in sadness, but I'd also like to ask everyone, wherever you are, to take a minute and take a moment for joy, to share the joy that has been knowing George Ricardo, and to share your stories and memories of him. We're going to start today with a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace, a time to be born and a time to die. George was a son, a brother, an athlete, a leader, and first and foremost, a friend. We are fortunate to have with us today loved ones to share their experience with George as members of all of the above. And I'd like to start today by calling on Lucy Ricardo, George's sister.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm sorry my video's not coming in as good as it should. Thank you, James. Over the last few weeks, I've been contemplating George's wonderful life. Recently, I had the good fortune to meet and talk with many of his friends, and I discovered there was a lot more to contemplate than I could have imagined. Yes, George was a son, a brother, a friend. He was an athlete, an artist, traveler, and a lover of sports and cars. He walked everywhere he went. He helped people in his building. He played with children. He chatted with neighbors by the bird bath in the park, and the list goes on. It's impossible to capture George's unique way of being in the world. It's doubtful that anyone has ever met anyone else like him. But I have been learning a lot about George, the man, from the people who were featured in his life. The people in George's life were people of exceptional character. George himself was described as a character and extraordinary by quite a few of his friends. And those compassionate people surrounded George with kindness and patience, admiration and acceptance, love and understanding. Many people don't get to experience that. George found it in many different kinds of people. Some he knew over decades, with whom He shared a deep bond, and they truly loved him, and he loved them too. And there are many other friends with whom George formed fast friendships throughout the community. And there were still more people who watched out for him like angels among us, who provided guidance or helped him in troubled times and were present to his last days with phone calls and texts in a time of pandemic and physical distancing. And his family loved him from a different kind of space, but bonded by the closest ties of blood and history and memories that are understood and known only to them. It is comforting to know that George was cared about by many good people. They saw his joyful, childlike nature, as well as the colorful aspects that unite us in a common humanity. For this I'm grateful, knowing that in his adulthood and independence, George was safe and loved. He was not alone. Many memories of George as a young boy keep surfacing for me. One memory in particular reminds me that his love of games started early on. Around the age of 8, he developed a keen interest in bingo, and we would be having dinner, and halfway through, he would lean over and whisper, "Do you want to play bingo?" And he repeated this question until the answer was yes. For a while, we played a lot of bingo, and George loved winning at bingo. In his teens, George played soccer on a team. In young adulthood, he found Special Olympics and began to follow his dream. Through competitive games and the support of his coaches, George developed skills in strength, self-discipline, and sportsmanship and team spirit. He embarked on a journey of evolution, galvanized by these qualities. And alongside an abundance of opportunities, freedom of expression, experience, and the supportive community, George's identity was profoundly shaped, one that served him well as he navigated through the oftentimes confounding world. Everyone knows about George's passion for sports. He often talked about his events and accomplishments, and this was his great passion, likely the thing he was most proud of in his life. With his decades-long dedication to Special Olympics and the extraordinary Special Olympics commitment to George, he achieved more than what medals can measure. George not only developed confidence and the desire to succeed, he garnered something many people never realize, a sense of belonging. He won at life. For this I'm grateful that George inhabited a place of nurturing and inclusion, where he was safe to carve out a rich and meaningful life. Things were not easy for George, and like many people, he had times of fear and insecurity and questioning and loneliness. But he was resilient in ways that kept him going in the face of challenge and doubt. He was creative, resourceful, and by all accounts, stubborn. Safe to say, very stubborn at times. And ultimately, he was brave in the face of tragedy as he crossed over the final finish line. In his shortened life, George lived to the fullest on his own terms. He ventured to cities throughout much of Canada. He enjoyed the freedom of play. He shared his humor and talents. He met celebrities. He laughed and connected with many people from all walks of life. Once he even posed with a picture of a wild alligator in Florida. And he had the thrill of driving a sports car. He followed his bliss. He was accepted, loved, and celebrated. For this I'm grateful. George did his best, and he lived his best life. Thank you to everyone who was part of George's life. Rest in peace, George. We love you.
Thank you, Lucy. At this time, I'd like to call upon Isabel and Brad Diamond, longtime friends of George. Izzy will be sharing a reading, and Brad will be sharing some memories of their times together.
Hi.
I'm Brad. That's Isabel.
I'm Isabel. And I'm just going to read a little obit from one of George's really good friends, Jerry, who has no social media and would like us to read it to him. He walked over one day to the apartment and handed this to Lucy and I'm going to share it with you now. George McLennan. He says, my best friend, my bro, my buddy, a great guy, smart, talented, loyal, and generous. I met George in the winter of 1999 at the Harry Red Foster Center near Summerhill and Yonge when I was living in the area. We became instant friends, playing billiards, darts, Monopoly, pinball, and whatever games we had access to. He was a member of the Center for Independent Living and Special Olympics. He was very passionate about active sports and competitive games. He was also very interested in graphic art, photography, cartooning, fast performance cars, classic hot rods, muscle cars, and collectibles. He was always willing to help out and had a keen interest in other people and world events. He was very enthusiastic about things he was passionate about. We used to go to sporting events like the Leafs, Raptors, and Blue Jays games when he got tickets through the Sports Association. I remember when we went to an NBA game, I met members of the Raptors courtside, and I threw a ball to Vince Carter during practice. Another time I met Pinball Clemens at a hockey game. I was amazed of the people George had met over the years with his talents, like Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor of California and Reuben Hurricane Carter. I used to play Olympic Scrabble with them on a regular basis. So George was an amazing friend. He had traveled all over the world, and I will dearly miss him. The Lord took him too early on his final trip. God be with you, my best friend. Rest in peace in heaven, Jerry. And I'd just like to add that George loved baked goods, especially my my mom's, who was Oma to everybody, and she made
Banana bread. Love the banana
a
bread.
banana cake for him in his honor. So Lucy, I'm supposed to share that with you to show his passion for that. So just so you know.
It's gonna be. You didn't say anything about sharing the banana cake with Lucy. Jeez.
Mom did. Okay. Anyways, thanks. We're gonna miss you. And
Well, I want to I'll make this quick, but I just want to thank Glenn McDonnell and all Special Olympics Ontario for doing this memorial for this special guy. You know, and as Lucy mentioned, there's no silver lining in what is a sad time, and for me, tragic when you think how quickly we lost George. But over the past for several weeks, we have met so many people from his apartment complex to across the country, but especially in his apartment complex, and the lives that he touched. He touched so many lives. So thank you for doing this. I know he's watching this from you know where. We met George in 1991 when we started documenting Special Olympics for TSN. He was a speed skater then, known as the Penguin. He called himself the Penguin. When he was at track, he called himself the Panther. But he became our family. I'm going to miss him so much. We both are. We used to do lunch. He loved to talk, loved his chocolate milk, loved his ice cream after. And it's just, he would end every conversation, whether you were talking to him or texting, with "later, Gator." And we're using that all the time. But you know, George to me was a bit of a role model also. I always advise young people in your life, whether it's your job or your hobby, if you can just find something passionate to do. Well, George had passion in spades. So many, but the top of the list, of course, was Special Olympics. It was his life. I think he taught us both as much about Special Olympics as the legendary Frank Hayden did. But to see him at the games, you know, yes, he was competing, but between the competition, there he'd be on the field. And as he got older, he'd like to mentor people. He'd walk up to the rookies, he'd welcome them, you know, and always said to everybody, never quit. His second passion was probably art. He loved to draw. He said he learned more drawing than he did even in school back in the old days. His claim to fame was, though, he drew a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Charles mentioned Schwarzenegger's village in Austria. And he never met Arnold, but Arnold saw the picture and sent him a picture with sign from Arnold saying, "Thank you, George," and believed that had a prominent place in his apartment. The other one was he actually worked for Motoring TV. We were doing a story on a tire called a Viking. I said, "George, can you draw me a Viking?" He says, "Can I?" So anyway, he sent me these photos. That was a pretty good one. And look at this one. This is George all over. So he sent us a picture of a Viking.
The other way.
Oh, so you can see it right there. It is. And we used it. Even the tire company was impressed. But his biggest passion, and maybe why we connected so early, because we do the car show, was cars. And Jerry mentioned he loved all cars. You know, classic muscle cars, anything with four wheels he loved. And every year he wanted to go to the Toronto Auto Show. So he came, he helped my crew. Then he had a pass. He'd be there every day for like 2 weeks and be sending us pictures every day. And also he loved to walk in the city. And you couldn't get by 1 week without George finding some car parked, and he'd send it to us and tell us why he thought it was such a cool car. But you know, they say dreams can't come true if you don't have a dream. And I think his lifelong dream, was to drive a car. Well, Russ Bond, who works for Motoring TV, made it happen. We're on a frozen lake up in Minden, Ontario. There was George, and he didn't know this was going to happen. He's sitting in the driver's seat. He's got his hands on the wheel, and he's got his foot on the gas. And I'm telling you, it was a real special moment for everybody. I mean, just to see how happy he was. And sorry, guys, just days before he passed away, he texted me and he said, "You know, Brad," he said, "2020 was a bad year for a lot of people. But," he said, "2020, my dream came true. And I just want you to know that I'm happy." And as Russ Bond said, he said, Russ said, "George, up in heaven, you can drive all you want and you're not going to get tickets." So I'm sure he's pretty happy. So all I can say is we miss you so much, George. Later, Gator.
Later, Gator.
Thank you, Izzy, and thank you, Brad, for sharing that. I'd like to ask Glenn McDonnell, the President and CEO of Special Olympics Ontario, to share some of his reflections on George.
Thanks, James. You know, as we've all heard, George was a character. I used to say George was a chameleon of sorts. You know, George let you see what George wanted you to see, and that worked for him, and it worked for us. That was George being George. I'm not sure whether George found Special Olympics or Special Olympics found George, but as we've heard, his connection to the movement is indelible. Over the past weeks, many of us have shared George stories. Most, if not all, finished with, "That was just George being George." My favorite George happened about 25 years ago. I can remember being in my office, and up came George, which he often came for a visit, plunked himself down in front of me and said, "Glenn, how do I get it to the national games?" So I went through the same rigmarole that we normally would have for athletes and tell them to work hard and train and listen to his coaches, go through the regionals, the provincials, and that's probably, George, how you make it to the nationals. And I said, "Well, George, why don't you go down and see Marion Colson?" Marion was the program director at the time, and George thought, "I'll take you up on that." And down the hallway, and George was like the Pied Piper. Everybody knew him, so he didn't need any introduction. And into Marion's office, and George was gone for about a half an hour. But a half an hour later, George came back up to the office, and this time he closed the door and he sat in the chair in front of me and he said, "Glenn, have you ever looked at what's outside your door?" I stopped for a minute, and then all of a sudden I realized what he was saying. Outside my door, it said President and CEO. So in essence, George wasn't sitting in front of me wanting any more rigmarole. He figured he could get help. So we had a good laugh about that. And as we know, George made it to a good number of national games since that time, and even to the international games just in 2015. George made all those games with little or no help from me. That was just George being George. You know, George had many acquaintances that we heard, and many people who befriended him easy. You know, that he lived life on his own terms, and that was just George being George. I'll remember him for who he was and what he was to me. But inside the organization, we'll remember the fun-loving George, the character that we all admired and had a lot of fun with. My memories will always be happy ones with George, because George usually made me happy. So as my sons, who were young at the time when they met George, as my oldest son said, George just made me laugh. And it's true. George had many skills, but maybe his greatest skills is he made a lot of us laugh. And so all the stories that I've heard and had from others over the last number of weeks, they really always seem to end with a laugh. So George, my friend, rest in peace. You'll be remembered, and although your life was too short, the memories and the good times that you left for all of us will always keep us happy and always will keep us laughing. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Glenn. We know of George as a friend and as a family member and as a loved one, and you can't put that and separate that from George as an athlete. And so I'd like to call upon a few of his friends who have known George as personally and as part of a team and as part of athletics. And first among those is Peter O'Neill, one of George's first coaches who coached George at Variety Village with the Scarborough Cyclones.
My name is Peter O'Neill, and from the early 1980s for 23 years onwards, I coached floor hockey for Ontario Special Olympics at Variety Village in Scarborough. For virtually all of those years, George Ricardo was part of our program. And for virtually all of those years, he was the best player we ever had. George was a magical athlete. His ability on the floor with a floor hockey stick was unstoppable. When he was on the floor, nobody could stop him. When he chose to play goaltender, nobody could beat him. He had a wonderful competitive spirit, but he also took great pleasure in assisting those less athletically inclined on the floor and set them up for an easy goal. He would get great pride in providing an assist for them. At one time in our heyday, I recall we had a line of 3 players who were all hearing impaired, and they were magical. Nobody could stop them. They had an amazing way of communicating in their own way, and when they were on the floor, they were dominant. What I will remember the most about George was not only his athletic ability, but more so how much everyone liked George. He was a friend to everybody. When we would go to tournaments, he would create great joy in socializing with all the players afterwards on both teams. He would know everybody, and everybody knew George. He had a high spirit of competitiveness, but he knew winning wasn't the only thing. It was a joy to play the game. I used to love watching him go to every player on opposing teams and chat it up with them, ask how they're doing, and everyone knew George Ricardo. It's with great sadness that I learned of George's death, but I will remember him as just an incredible athlete, a person who's had some tough times in his life, but went on to great things beyond floor hockey, track and field, soccer, and incredible in speed skating, and it doesn't surprise me at all how good he was. I will miss you, George. It was a joy to coach you.
Thank you, Peter. And now I'd like to introduce Neil Lewis, soccer coach for Special Olympics Brampton, who was George's coach as part of the bronze medal winning team at World Games in Abu Dhabi.
Hi, my name is Neil Lewis. I'm the head coach for Brampton Special Olympics soccer team. George Ricardo was a genuinely honest and friendly guy with a great sense of humor who joined Special Olympics Brampton 12 years ago. He was a skilled soccer player who instinctively helped other players develop their skills, no matter what level they played. George was blind in one eye, and whenever he missed a scoring opportunity, he would look at me with a big smile on his face and say, it was because he couldn't see the net properly. Every tournament we attended, George knew at least one person at the soccer field. At the end of the day, we always had to look for George because he was chatting and making new friends. Every practice day, George would arrive at my house around 4 p.m. I would ask him if he would like something to eat. His response was always yes. When he was finished eating, he would always say that was the best meal he'd ever had. George attended many provincial and national games in a number of different sports, but his greatest wish was to represent his country at the World Games. His wish came true when the soccer team represented Canada at the World Games in Abu Dhabi, winning a bronze medal and expanding his circle of friends internationally. George will be greatly missed in Brampton by athletes, coaches, and parents.
Thank you, Neil. We've heard from his coaches, and I think now we would like to hear from those that George considered his friends and his teammates. And speaking about that friendship is Kevin Timberlake.
Hi, my name is Kevin Timberlake, and I've been involved with Special Olympics since '92, and I knew George from the track and field team, and he introduced me to floor hockey in '92, and I lent me some hockey helmet, gloves to play, and I came on met the team and had some good times with him, and he was really close to my dad and my family, and I was on the soccer team and softball team for a couple of years, and I've been in 2020 I lost my wife. Been a tough year, and so about hearing the passing of George, to the family and friends. I'm really going to miss you, George.
Thank you, Kevin. Before we move into the last part of our service, I wanted to invite all of you to join us all, George's friends, George's family, and Special Olympics Ontario in a Zoom and virtual reception. The link to that reception will be in your YouTube chat or in your Facebook chat, or you can go to https://soontario.io/George-Ricardo-Zoom. Thank you to those who have shared your stories and memories of George being George. We hear these stories, and from the depth of our sadness, do not forget how fortunate we are. How fortunate we are to have had George share his life with us and to have shared a moment of our life with him. He loved us, and we loved him in return. And that is as unchangeable and irrepressible as George Ricardo himself. So we count ourselves fortunate to know each other through George and to share that friendship because of him, and to be able to celebrate him and his love for life in this way today. And so I invite you to watch images of George being George.
Well, it first happened back in 1986. I remember there's three guys I remember in the neighborhood. Then I noticed they were playing hockey and came with hockey sticks and helmets. So I followed him to the school. That's where they started floor hockey. And I thought to myself, when I played for the Cyclones, I thought I would just play for 3 years and that's it, I quit. And that was a bad idea. So I thought, wow, I see other people do other stuff like soccer, track, skiing. So I said, hey, I better stick around. So here I am, 25 years. I don't think I've quit. How'd you do?
It's 8-6 something.
Yeah, I got about 789 from best one. Right on, George. Right on. Get going. There were some athletes I've seen before they're very young, and like 5 years later, they're still here. Well, I told them, their mother, I said, have them keep coming, keep encouraging them to come out, and you see how well they do over the years, improvement. That's good to bring them back. I told them never quit.
Yeah, you too.
Right. Yeah. I know.
Some of you may remember this. George, that's a NASCAR truck, and we're going to be driving that thing today.
Awesome.
And at the end of that segment, George had a special request for Kerry Mix.
Now can I drive?
We'll talk. Hey, you'll never guess who's back with us. It's our old friend George. And like last time, he doesn't know what's about to happen. George, last time you were with me and Kerry, what did you ask us?
I want to drive.
Well, this time, have a look down there. It may be happening.
Hey, George, we meet again. Get in. Let's have some fun. Go. Now this corner's sharp, so you got to hit the brake a little bit and let off.
Oh my.
Yeah, see, that corner's a bit sharp. Now you can go faster down there. Whoa, watch it. Whoa, brake. Whoa, brake. There you go.
Oh, sorry.
You never had nothing.
Sorry, but
No problem. You're all good.
oh my God.
It actually blows me away, 54 years, I believe it is, that he never drove and out there, and he drove around the track. Great. I think he had a ball today.
How was that?
Awesome. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Kerry, how did
Awesome driving.
Great
Love
job.
the driving. Yeah,
Good
man.
job.
Right on. Straight away and going really fast at speed. I love that. But the corners, got to be careful. I have to get used to more of the corners. And awesome. I like to do that. I like that. It's just awesome. Thanks again, man. Awesome. Thanks, man. Wish come true.
All ready to fight.
It was the 2006 Summer Games in Brandon, Manitoba. George, running second, stumbled and fell. His medal hopes vanished. But George did not give up.
Next day, I have a little knee injury, and in the 400 meters, I was leading last. I came all the way around to first. I didn't quit.
Is that how you live your life?
Yep. Nothing stops me from doing things. People say you can't do this, can't do that. I can do. No such thing as can't. I can do anything just like everybody else.